Welcome, everybody. It's Friday once again, which means I get to do this all over every week. MSP Confidential here, bringing incredible guests from the MSP industry and beyond to have interesting conversations. Today, I have a wonderful guest, Mr. Brian Hoppe. Welcome to MSP Confidential. It's good to have you, man. How have you been?
Thanks so much. Doing great. Doing great. Excited to have a good conversation.
That's awesome, man. Well,
Yeah.
I just was checking into whether this was live or not, and it seems like the LinkedIn stream did not push out for whatever reason. So I'm just going to quickly go grab the YouTube link and put it in the comments in case people want to jump on. I don't know what happened today with that. I'm going to have to go do some testing and make sure that that's actually working because normally Restream is pretty good about just pushing it out. And but let me just
Okay.
go grab this link. Join us on YouTube.
If it's not coming through,
Yeah,
join us on YouTube.
that's right,
Beautiful.
man. Thanks again for being here. We connected just kind of serendipitously. You had just posted on LinkedIn about your journey. You know, you've been an MSP. You kind of found yourself in this place of wonder with coaching and the vocation of being a coach and all that stuff. And I wanted to just ask you to tell us a little bit about your backstory. You know, you kind of gave me the lowdown when we chatted backstage a little bit, but just for everybody that maybe hasn't met you, how did you get started in the MSP industry, and what brought you now into being a MSP CEO coach specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. So yeah, I mean, I'm one of those rare individuals who actually like went to school for technology. Like, I feel like most people were, I don't know, were planning on doing something else and somehow found their way into it. But I kind of knew I wanted to do tech. And yeah, so I started off basically right out of college, working for a small break fix. There was just two of us, and eventually, or after not too long, we ended up getting kind of purchased by a family office in down here in Texas, and grew that MSP under kind of that umbrella. For the next 12 years, actually. So that's kind of where I learned about, hey, what does it take to actually grow and scale an MSP? And then I kind of said, hey, I'd like to do this for myself, actually, right? Instead of for somebody else. And so yeah, ended up buying into a smaller MSP in 2016. Purchased in another MSP in 2018, and these were in the financial services sector. So we were kind of banks, credit unions, small
Mm.
community banks and credit unions, and yeah, and then did a couple purchases, integration, and then ended up selling that. Kind of the time chose me. I kind of thought I would be in, or I thought I would be in it for quite a bit longer. But the time chose me, and back in late 2021, we executed on the sale of that to a private equity company.
Wow.
So yeah, and I worked for the buyer for a little over a year, and then exited that back yeah, just not too much over a year ago, and then kind of embarked on the coaching journey after that. So yeah.
Well, and it's fascinating that like within a couple of years of being in it, like that you had sort of a bit of this eye on the M&A piece or of like going out to acquire another business. It feels like for a lot of people that takes a longer period of time before sort of they feel ready to do that. And if I recall, in your case, that MSP you acquired in 2018 was actually a much larger business than you were, if that's
Yeah,
correct. And so maybe tell
at
me
the
a bit
time.
of that, the mindset of like, can I do this? Am I ready for M&A? Like, what does this even look like? Because I feel maybe a lot of people are afraid to take that step, not kind of knowing what's
Yeah.
on the other side of it. But, talk me through a bit of that situation.
Right, right. Well, I'm going to say, like, don't follow my example. Okay, so like, no, I say that partly joking, but also I had been involved in several M&A transactions previously, and so I kind of knew, like, I knew, one, that I didn't want to run a very small MSP long term, or I didn't want to kind of grow it from scratch, and so I knew that M&A was going to be part of my strategy, just because I'd been involved in search, due diligence, execution, integration already, and so I kind of knew the process and knew what I was in for, so to speak. And so yeah, so all that to say. you do have to choose growth by acquisition carefully, and you really want it to. I mean, you do want to know what you're getting into, ideally, and then also generally not advisable to try and acquire a company that's larger than your own. So like, so I say that I'm like, hey, don't follow my example in some ways, but it can work out if you know what you're doing. So that's what I'd say on that.
Well, and you're not the first person I've talked to that has actually acquired a business larger than they were. And, sometimes it's just, 2 years in, you may have just not had the chance to grow. And maybe the actual, I guess, history of the MSP would have led you there anyways. But if
Right.
you've got the mindset, if you're kind of prepared for running what the larger organization is, or, and oftentimes these are just perfect storm situations, right? Like the other
Mhm.
business was just wanting to sell, the owner is transitioning out, and sometimes you just
Yeah.
land in these situations that are so
Yeah.
perfect for the moment. So you don't always control all those things, and I guess you can look for them all you want, but not
Yeah.
necessarily always land on the perfect outcome. So
It's true. It's true.
yeah. A few years ago, a few months back in December, we chatted with Joel Abramson, who's actually who introduced us. Thank you, Joel, for the
Yeah.
introduction, because it's been fantastic chatting with you, Brian. But one of the things that Joel talked to, that I kind of asked him the question, what is the objective, or how do you build an M&A strategy, for example? And he's very succinct in saying, well, you kind of don't always know exactly where things are going to end up, but it's good to come into it with an idea of like where you want to go with it, right? And I
Yeah.
think M&A for the sake of M&A is not always productive or necessarily the right thing to do. And so going into it, tell me a bit about what was sort of your ultimate objective. Growth by acquisition is the easy answer, I guess, is my point. But
Yeah.
what was that internal drive that you had, sort of putting you in this crosshairs of an M&A deal?
Yeah. So I think that it was kind of part of my strategy from the beginning. When most of the time when I talk to MSPs for the first time, it's kind of like, yeah, I want to grow, and I want to hit X million dollars, and and there's kind of this concept of what they want, but there's not really a plan, right? And there's not really a why. So it's like maybe that number's 10 million, and I want to hit 10 million in revenue. It's like, okay, why? What's behind that? And so and so that's part of what I do is kind of really help crystallize, okay, this is the why behind that, and what does that look like with personal wealth targets and the business valuation and all of those things. And so I went through a process like that of, okay, here's what I would like this to look like in X number of years. And in order to do that, I put together kind of a value creation strategy for
Mm-hmm.
that, right? So here's what organic growth looks like, percentage wise. Here's how much of that's going to be MRR. Here's what our EBITDA is going to look like, and then here's what growth is going to come through acquisition, and here's the approximate multiple we can probably buy this size of a company for, and when we add it to our company, then it'll be worth this multiple, and just kind of like playing out that scenario, and what does that look like toward kind of getting towards our end goal. And that's kind of like the reason behind it. For me, was like it was kind of unknown in some ways, and then really just helping kind of accelerate my
Mm-hmm.
path to what I wanted the company to become at the
Well,
end of the day. So
how pragmatic of you, Brian. And I talk
well,
about we talk about pragmatism every once in a while, because it feels like you can clearly see the MSP owners that take that pragmatic approach just unlock this interesting growth opportunity, right?
yeah.
And by the way, this pragmatism shows up in so many different ways. And one of the things you talked about was sort of adopting EOS early, joining the peer groups early. And so maybe talk me through a bit of the thing that was unlocked by the peer groups in your case. And peer groups are not a foreign concept or idea for anybody in this industry. I think a lot of us already do this organically, naturally, and in the more organized peer groups, obviously some real special things tend to happen.
Mhm.
But talk to me through a bit of your peer group experience, and what was the thing
Mm.
that was, the click, the double click.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that was a huge piece of my journey. no doubt about it. And I kind of, in some ways, kind of stumbled into peer groups, but it really did unlock something for me as a leader, and really understanding a lot of things that I just had no clue about the industry, about my business, about how to actually to grow a mature, sustainable MSP and scalable MSP. Right. So I think something that came to mind when you were asking that question was, well, I think one of the things that was kind of a mindset shift for me when, in part of the peer group experience was, hey, your business, like as much as it might be like your income stream and your way of life and your baby, all of that. If you take a step back, it's an asset. And at the end of the day, it's no different than owning a stock or a real estate investment or something like that. If you think about it from the lens of an investor, right, of a business owner. And so
Mhm.
I think of my MSP as not a job, but as an asset. What am I, what do I want that asset to do? What do I want it to produce? It has a relatively high risk compared to, let's say owning a stock, right? Because, something goes wrong, guess who? That's who they're coming after. They're coming after me. And so you see business owners out there, and it's like, hey, my asset is returning me 5% a year. Okay, great. Well, is that good or is that bad? Or are you losing money on that asset? And
Mhm.
what does that look like? And why not just get rid of this asset and put it in the stock market? Because the stock market did whatever 20% in some over that time period. And so thinking about it in those terms, I think kind of like shifted something for me, and not to the obviously this is not to the exclusion of like you own a business, you have people, you have it's important, the work that you do is important, all of those things, but there's a mindset that's kind of like stepping back and thinking a little bit more strategically about it as an asset that I think for me made a difference in how
Mhm.
I thought about it, and like you said, kind of that pragmatism or that or that planning aspect that I for sure didn't have before. And and there's a lot of people, there's so many people out there, like I didn't make any of this up, right? Like I I learned it from people in my peer group, or from service leadership, from all these different areas. And then I took the best of all of that stuff and tried to make what the best business that I could make out of it, right? So now I lost your original question, but I think it was something like the peer groups being
Yeah.
foundational and that kind of a thing.
Yeah, this idea, and I think you kind of nailed it when you talked about the mindset that was maybe the thing that the peer group unlocked for you. Because I think what perhaps the peer groups do, and I did peer conversations more casually, organically during my time. I was never in an organized, peer
Mhm.
group situation, but I've been to many on the vendor side. And what I notice always is there's obviously a high degree of accountability. There's a certain number of systems and things that as a group they're trying to conform to, so they can at least
Yeah.
be talking apples to apples. And a lot of
Mhm.
these things kind of play this role in standardizing a bit of your operational process inside of the business. Because the reality is, like, people that come into the MSP industry are not always business operators. We're great technical folks and stuff like that. We're kind of learning the business thing on the fly.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so I do love that about peer groups. It kind of forces you to organize yourself inside of this, standards or patterns that the peer group is kind of operating by. And, the larger ones obviously do this at scale, whether it's HTG, now obviously part of the ConnectWise ecosystem, or PAX8 has C-level operations and stuff like that. So there's so much value, I think, in having a bit of that North Star, I guess is the best way I can describe it. So
Yeah. 100%.
yeah. Now the this idea of being a coach, and I asked this maybe snarky question as the topic for this session today. Are you coachable? And it's been a little bit of a maybe a topic the last week and a half or so, because a couple of times I've been chatting with people in the last little bit where, like, this idea, Todd Kane actually mentioned it, like asking for help is not bad, or there's no real negative connotation to this idea that you can ask for help and be helped in your situation. but there seems to be still this stereotype that people is like, no, I can figure it out on my own. I'm going to go do this, and we're just going to power through the thing. But where did this start to click into for you that maybe coaching and perhaps your own coaching experience as the coachee, so to speak?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, like your first foray into that.
Yeah, right. And it was actually, it was around a similar time period, not too long after getting into peer groups. And actually it was HTG at the time, and they had some coaching as part of that. And I was like, you know what, this sounds like an interesting idea. Let's give it a shot. And I had no idea of what I was getting myself into, because it's and put me on a 10 plus year journey that's landed me here. Right. So, and I always point back to, peer groups, a business operating system, and coaching as the three kind of the triad of things that really unlocked it for me. But yeah, so I first got into it back then, and that experience was so powerful to me that, after that, I don't know, I probably bought 10 to 15 books on coaching over the next little bit, and said, hey, I know this is something that I want to do one day. But obviously I was still working in an MSP. And so, yeah, that's how impactful it was to me, that it not only professionally, but also personally, in my life. And so, so fast forward, after selling the business, after stepping out of the, of my role in the purchasing company, it was just the right timing for me to kind of move forward with this. And so, I know you asked part of that, or that part of it. What was? Can you tell me again what you asked?
No, that's it. It was just kind of like, what was the thing that the peer groups kind of unlocked for you in the mindset. And we talked a bunch about mindset just in general, because I feel like sometimes people come into even when they put themselves in a coaching situation of being coached, they still maybe come into it with a bit of a wall up. I'm not that great at sales. I'm here against my own will. It's kind of like offering to be helped, but not really. And I'm curious now, sort of in your position as a coach, if you come across us a little bit, people that maybe have called you and they're either all in on the coaching mindset and they want to be helped, but maybe there's this little thread of like, I don't know about this. I'm not convinced that this is the right way for me to do it. And so, tell me a bit about that. This is sort of getting to the point of like, are you coachable, right?
Yeah. So, I think to an extent everyone is coachable. But it really is. I mean, you kind of got to this a little bit, which is your mindset, right? So what is your mindset? And there's a good bit of research that's happened on the concept of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? Generally, if you have a growth mindset, it's a little bit easier to be coached, right? Because it's like, hey, no, I'm committed to learning, I'm committed to growing. I really want to try new things and change some things, try on some concepts, that kind of a thing, versus the fixed mindset of, that could be whatever. I'm really bad at sales, right? Mm. So if you believe you're really bad at sales, how likely are you to try new things and move, kind of move down the path towards being a great salesperson? And most people, if you're bad at sales, the reason is because you haven't practiced. It's the same reason that your French isn't so good, right? Like, you haven't practiced for your French or your Spanish or whatever. Like, the only way you can be bad at Spanish, but the only way to get better at it is to learn and practice, and that's it. And so, if we can kind of unlock some of those mindsets that are like, that are really holding you back, then that's part of what we do as coaches, is help people to kind of overcome some of those fixed mindsets and get them into a space of growth where they're actually they're trying new things, they're stepping out into some fear that's been holding them back, and kind of move, and that's what helps you move forward as an individual, and it helps your business move forward.
Yeah, I think the fear piece is an interesting nuance of this too. Just a few weeks ago, I was chatting with Chris Do, who I know who you know who he is, and around the coaching side, he one of the things he talked about that I thought was interesting is that most of the time spent up front, and this is just him telling a bit of his own experience in doing a bit of this one-on-one coaching with people, is spent, trying to bust down the limiting beliefs that people
Mm,
have coming into it. And so I think we just carry a lot of this baggage, obviously, coming into situations like that. And so my point simply being the open-mindedness to possibilities, to different ways of
yeah.
doing things, to allowing yourself to change your mind on stuff, I think plays such an important role to whether you can make a pivot and succeed and get focused or prioritize the things that you need to prioritize. And so that more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you come across this a lot. You're dealing upfront with a lot of that baggage.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the, yeah, like you said, it's kind of a part of the process of getting to know the individual and where, where they do think part of their limitations might be. What are the things that they're tolerating in their life and in their
Mm.
business, and then also like it's a lot of times hard, when you're walking into an engagement with somebody and you kind of, it's like, hey, this is your business, you really love it, it's your baby. I'm sorry to tell you that you have an ugly baby and here's why. And like some of those kind of things where, so, but but people do get to that pain point where it's like, I've had enough. And so now I'm willing to grow. I'm willing to consider what I might not know that might be holding me back. I'm willing to consider that, since I've been stuck at $2 million for the last 5 years, and keep thinking I'm going to get over the hump, but then something happens. There's a reason for that, and it might be me. And so, how can we take a look in the mirror and say, yeah, it probably is, like realistically, and like I mean, yeah, and the other concept that is like, hey, whatever your business is doing right now, it's a system, and it is perfectly optimized to do exactly what it's doing right now. And
Yeah,
so
I've heard that before. Yeah.
if we don't change something, it's going to keep doing the same thing it's been doing. Whether that if it's growing, great, but if it's stagnating, then it's dying. And you're either growing or you're dying. And so yeah. Anyways, that's it can be a challenge, but I do think there's potential inside everybody to be coached, right?
Mm.
Even the highest performers, the most stubborn people, the most elite, arrogant performers in sports, right? They all have a coach, and so you like there is space for everybody to be coached, but it is in to be coachable, and it's just kind of sometimes a matter of a process of unlocking something. So,
Now, one of the things that I've come across in my travels as an MSP is this idea, and it was kind of it came from maybe a sales proverb or sales quote, but this idea that people reject what they're told, but accept what they conclude. And I
mm,
find it sort of interesting or funny, perhaps. I'll say that one more time. People reject what they're told, but accept what they conclude. And
yeah.
in the business of coaching, you must have needed, maybe you did this successfully organically, but just telling people they're wrong is probably not going to work most of the time. You kind of just lead them down the path of asking the right questions, lead the horse to water, so to speak, and let
Mhm.
them conclude on their own that maybe there is a better way. And so tell me a bit about this process, because I think it's highly relevant also to how MSPs relate to their own clients in getting them to do the things that they need them to do. Sometimes we are trying to sell too hard, and this is why we're getting the pushback.
Mhm.
But perhaps when the client, realizes this on their own, and they say, "Hey, I have this great idea. I think we should do this project." Yes, that is a great idea. Let's go ahead and do that project. But when it
Right.
comes from them, there's a whole other level of success that's unlocked, level two. So
Yeah.
tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's absolutely. I mean, and I think that so when we think about coaching, and coaching as a discipline, it really is going to be question based. Really is going to be a process of reflective inquiry, and And really, like, the goal of it is kind of to help people see that most everybody is very intelligent and has and successful and all of those things, and they have 90% of the answers all, sit right up in here, right? And so it's a process of asking powerful questions that are going to elevate the thinking of the individual being coached. It is good. They're going to help them see things that they can't see, and and the goal is always to come to a place of insight where it's like, oh my gosh, how come I never realized that before? I
Mm.
like, duh, I knew that. I just didn't have the brain space or the time or the reflection to really think about it deeply. And one of my favorite things is when I ask a question and it's just like, you know, it's silence, because it's like they're just thinking and they're thinking and they're thinking, and then it's like out comes this answer that was like, you just told me you didn't know the answer to this, but you did, right? And that moment of insight, that place that's something's unlocked, that was hidden before, is just that's what it's about. And it's not 100% question asking, but it is like, hey, let's get you to think about this, because what you said is true. Like, it's much more powerful if you come up with the solution on your own
Mm.
from a process of thinking really deeply. And a coach is going to provide some reflection and notice things about you as they get to know you. They're going to notice things. They're going to know your personality and the ways that you tend to respond to things, and be able to ask you even better questions over time. So yeah, that's, to me, that's the power of coaching versus consulting, mentoring, or some of the other kind of modalities that we think about. It really has the potential to unlock something inside.
Well, my mind is kind of blown right now because as you're talking through this and this idea of like, hey, it's asking powerful questions. We're really coaching. This is exactly kind of the way that MSPs could reframe the relationship they have with their clients, in that they're trying to, if they think themselves as a coach to their clients, coaching them through technology strategy, coaching them through
Mm,
technology period. I think it maybe just puts a different perspective on the go to market of that, asking the powerful questions. And so I wanted to get into this idea of the powerful questions, because I don't know that everybody is necessarily born with this idea of asking powerful questions, or knows how to ask powerful questions, or calibrated questions, as Chris Voss would call them. I've gotten
mm.
into a little bit of that in the last couple months. But tell me a little bit about your framework for asking powerful questions, and I to get that some of them are just the philosophical, thread that you might be discussing at the moment, but sometimes you got to work on asking and framing the right questions before you're ready to ask them. And so, talk to me through that a bit.
Yeah. Well, it really depends on the context, right? So are you thinking more about, like, with a client, that kind of a thing, or what are you thinking when you're asked about?
Totally with the client. Like I think, again, trying to maybe obviate the tendency that we have to jump right into the answer, right? As
Yeah.
IT people, maybe it's kind of this, hey, can I pause for a second and just linger in the curiosity a little bit longer and ask yet another question, to try and uncover the
Yeah.
last stage or layer of the onion that maybe is going to produce the desired effect. So it's more of like, as IT people, I think we tend to jump into the answer a lot, and maybe the reflection of stopping and just asking one more question,
Mhm.
and so,
Yeah.
but asking again the powerful question, as opposed to
Yeah.
just a yes or no answer that doesn't make you, get to any new place through the conversation necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm reminded of a book and it's probably a good 10 years old, 10 years plus at this point, but the Secrets of Question-Based Selling, I think, is what it's called. It's been a long time since I read it, but it is like, if yes, but I mean, I think clients, prospects, respond much better to questions than they do to answers, right? Or than they like. Nobody
Mm.
wants you to give them a presentation, right? They want you to ask. They want to be listened to. They want you to know their problems. And so, even like a first meeting for me, when I was going into a sales situation with a potential client is just is questions. It's all questions. I mean, so and when I mean, obviously you have questions like, so how, who's your provider for this? Who's your provider for that? That's great. But what do you care about as a business owner? What's the most important thing to you, and why? Why is that important to you? Like even just like you ask the first question, but you ask the follow up question, the why. And usually when you get to the second or third why, there's some really deep thinking going on at that point, right? Because it's this is important to me. Well, why is that important to you? They give an answer. Why? So why is that important to you? And if you did like those digging questions, another great question is just, and what else? What else? Tell me what else. So if you're talking about their issues, their problems, one of my favorite questions to ask was always, hey, this thing happened. We keep having this problem with this and that, and so one of my favorite questions there was, what happens when that happens? Like, so if you got this problem, what happens when that happens? Oh, okay, yeah, great. Yeah. And then even things like, and these are kind of, they can, I don't know if you consider them sneaky questions, but things like, so when your current IT provider sends you your security reports every month, how are those looking? And they're like, wait a minute, IT.
We should be getting security reports.
Yeah, right. Oh, wait, maybe we're missing something. Yeah. You didn't tell them they were. They just realized they were, right. So that's an example of a question that could be asked. That's like, oh, I'm getting my prospect thinking, right, instead of just regurgitating information to me.
And this is what I meant by, this is what Chris Voss would call a calibrated question. Is it's kind of an assumptive question that there's something that is there that you kind of know is not. And I wouldn't call it sneaky. I think it's just, you operate, if you're trying to drive a different baseline or standard than your competition is, then those are perfectly reasonable and fair questions to be asking because you're doing those things. So but to turn this back on the coaching, I think there is so much of what we do day to day that distracts us from the priorities of like growing a business, running an MSP, and maybe as the business gets a little bit bigger and you can bring in a layer of middle management, or you can hire people to let yourself be taken out of the weeds. Some of these things are made a little bit easier, but I think a lot of MSPs live in that very, very difficult purgatory of like, under 7-person shop. There's really no layer of management. They're kind of wearing 10 hats at the same time. Mm-hmm. What would be your advice to an MSP sort of challenged with that? It's like, oh, I'd love to do some coaching. I just have no time for it right now. And of course, like, if it was a priority, you'd make time for the coaching. But that's not the answer they want to hear, obviously. So tell me a bit about, have you worked with some smaller shops, and what was the thing that helped them get over that hump of like making time for it?
Yeah. I think it's like you have to get to a point as an owner where you understand that where the value is of your time, right? So the value of the time that you spend working in the business is much less than the time you spend working on the business. And this is, a lot of people say this, but it's like, hey, I can probably tell how successful you're going to be or how well you're going to grow by how much time you spend working in the business versus working on the business and selling. Like, realistically, like it's just like, if you're out in front of clients, if you're spending half your time actually in the community, building trust with potential clients and making sales, then realistically you're going to grow. And if you're not doing that, it's just going to be very difficult, because at some point the referrals are going to run out. Enough clients are going to leave that you're going to either stagnate or you're going to shrink. And so I think it's a point of getting fed up with that and understanding like, hey, yeah, I've got to free myself up from the day-to-day hair on fire, from being the center of my business, and in order for it to grow. And in order to do that, I have to learn to delegate well. I have to learn to hire people well. I have to learn to let go and not try to be the center of everything. And usually I've got to get help with it. right? And so when you do that, I mean, that's when you can actually, get out of the office and, for a couple of days and go to a peer group, or get coaching, or spend more time being strategic about how you're actually going to grow the company. So yeah, and I've worked with plenty of individuals who are in, like you said, 7 or even 5, and they find the time. It's magic, like you absolutely can find the time. And even in a company that size, you can find the time and have it be peaceful and productive and all of those things. Like there's something on the other side of the crazy, and because I've seen it firsthand. And you don't have to be a big company. You don't have to be a big company. So anyways, that's my take on that.
Now, I'm sure that the various people that you work with maybe have varying zones of genius, and you and I talked a bit about this idea of the zone of genius. Gay
Oh
Hendricks
yeah.
has this interesting book about it, and that must be interesting. I remember in my early days as a consultant when I was doing residential IT, I remember articulating for myself how much I loved the surprise of walking into an unknown situation. Like this was my
Mhm.
dopamine hit, right? In any given situation. I think as I got older and I wanted a little bit more reliability in my day to day, I started to get
Yeah.
away from this idea of like unknown situations. Like I wanted everything to be known, and
Yeah.
sort of I wasn't crazy about the complete chaos anymore. But in the relationship of starting up a coaching thing with a new client, there must be a little bit of this discovery period. What is this person's zone of genius, and how to find it. And sometimes people maybe need a leg up to be like, hey, I think you're great at working on these things. It sounds like you're trying to do something that A, you don't enjoy, B, you're not so good at. So stop doing that, right?
Yeah.
And I get that as a business owner, maybe you don't have a choice sometimes, but talk to me
Right.
a bit through your thinking around the zone of genius.
Yeah, yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely huge for not only a successful business, but just generally happiness and your contributions to the world, right? So there's an exercise that I go through with my clients. It's kind of like, hey, like put everything you do down on a piece of paper or in a spreadsheet. We'll give you a spreadsheet because piece of paper. Well, some people love paper still. I'm allergic to paper, so I put it in a spreadsheet. But yeah, put down everything you do, and then you put it in. And you might need to track it for a couple of weeks or something like that, just to capture everything. Put down your roles, what you do as part of that, because many owners have 7 different roles, right? They're lead tech, they're salesperson, they're sales manager, they're marketing manager, they're CEO, they're COO, et cetera, et cetera. But put down all the stuff you do, and we put it in 4 buckets. So the things you don't like and you're not good at, the things you don't like and you are good at, the things that you like and you're pretty good at, and the things you love and you're great at, right? So as you do that, you start seeing, okay, these are the things I love and I'm great at, and how do I get more focus on those things? Where people get trapped a lot of times is the things that they like and they're good at. Like I like those and I'm pretty good at them, and you tend to get stuck there, and they call Gay Hendricks calls that the zone of excellence, because I'm pretty productive, I'm better than most people at it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not my zone of genius. If I can get out
Hmm.
of that space, I get out of the zone of excellence and all of the other stuff, by the way. Like if you don't like it and you're not good at it, just outsource now. Like don't even think about it. Like bookkeeping, like you don't like it, you're not good at it, just outsource it. It's so easy. Like just do it.
But
But
nobody
when you
has the
get up
same
and
attention to detail as I do, right? Like that is
yeah,
always
right.
the
Yeah. There's
justification.
all kinds of excuses, but yeah. Anyways, but yeah, it really is about finding, okay, what are the things that I love, I'm great at. They make they bring the most value to the business and to me personally and to the world, and in figuring out what those things are, and then consistently working to delegate everything else that's not part of those things. And so, like for myself, I mean, I'll give you an example of myself now. Like I'm a coach, right? And so I started my business on my own, all by myself, all of that. And eventually I was like, hey, I'm doing all this stuff that I'm like, I can do it, but it doesn't make any sense. And so I said, okay, so what are the things that I love doing, I'm uniquely good at, nobody else can do? And for me, it's coaching, it's it's having conversations with clients, and it's some content creation. Those are the things that I'm great at, that only I can do, and everything else, like my assistant's job, that's her job, is to take everything else off my plate other than those three things, right? So
Totally. Like
that's it.
these are so critical. Like they're you always hear these things in the same circles of certain types of conversations. You should only do what only you can do. I've heard Paul Green talk about this. He's got a great podcast and there's a bunch of
Oh yeah, I
marketing
was on
stuff.
that this last week.
And so, but one of my favorite expressions has also been this idea that just because you can, it doesn't mean you should. And I think that's sort of the ultimate equalizer of that situation where, like, yeah, I could probably do that better than the next person. Well, that doesn't mean I should jump right into that activity because it takes me out of
Yeah,
my zone of genius, of course.
yeah.
And so the other thing we talked about, and I'm going to put this little thing on the screen because it's such a powerful
Oh
idea,
yeah.
but it's this idea of like ikigai and where all the ideal things meet. And my question to you as we talk about ikigai, because you're the one who brought this up during our sort of prep call, was
Yeah.
what was the thing that led you down the path to coaching? Because it's a very, very specific niche thing to be doing now.
Mhm.
And so talk to me a little about through your process of discovering this and realizing this is where you needed to be.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier as far as my experience with it. I was just like, this is life changing for me, and I want to do the same for others. And so I think that I think a combination of that, along with I've when I was running my business, I had a coach, a business coach, and I still work with my coach to today, right? I'm no longer MSP, but I was like, hey, I'm gonna, yes, every high performer has a coach. I want to be a high performer. I'm gonna have a coach. That's my that's my mentality about it. And if I'm going to coach and say I believe in the power of coaching, I better have one of my own too, right? And so, but I think that I think to me there's a service aspect of it. So one of my core values is service. My personal core purpose is to serve others, embrace beauty, and live life to the fullest. And so serving others, I think there's a piece of discovery in there where it's like I'm always learning from my clients, right? It's not only like, hey, I'm going to help you. I learn things every day through every conversation. And so lifelong learning is another one of my things. And then just yeah, and then looking at the concept of ikigai, right? So what am I good at? What do I love doing? I love coaching. I'm really good at coaching. What does the world needs? Absolutely, it needs coaching, and what I could be paid for, coaching, right? So it all fits together. And this, I mean, this was a process of discovery that I went through with my coach, and talking about like kind of after I exited. Okay, so what's next? What's the right thing? Do I go here? Do I go there? And just going through that process of discovery was just key in like in putting all these pieces together. And you can tell I get a little excited about it because because I'm like, man, this is I'm passionate about it. And I love how this concept kind of brings all that stuff together. It's similar to the hedgehog concept, but it takes another aspect into it and really kind of brings it to the forefront. So I love this.
Yeah. Now, I remember a couple years back, I remember interviewing Nigel Moore from the
Oh,
Tech Tribe, and
Nigel, yes.
and Nigel is such a smart individual. Like he has obviously been there, done that, which I think is one of those tacit qualifications that we put on people that we want to take any advice from. We tend to not want to listen to anybody who hasn't done those things. But he used the term woo woo when we were talking about personal growth and business growth and team growth. And so you dropped that term a couple of days ago when we were chatting in preparation for this call. And I can't help but think that some people are still just going to, oh, this coaching thing is just all woo woo. And they're kind of separating themselves from this idea of being open-minded to coaching. And my question is simply what do you say to those who find this coaching thing to be all woo woo?
Yes. Well, I think that it's really funny. I was actually having this conversation this morning with a potential client, and he was shooting me straight. He was like, yeah, it's like, you hear about all these people and they're like a life coach and they're like, I'm really going to help you. And it's like, well, what is it? What does that even mean? Like, why do I need a coach for my life? What is this all about? And it could be the same thing. Why do I need a coach for an MSP? But and I was like, hey, all right, like, and he was like, what if you called yourself an advisor? And I was like, great, I'll be an advisor. That's fine. I'll be an advisor who asks you a lot of questions, and I will give you advice occasionally. That's great. Why don't you think of it as an advisor? Because guess what? The president has advisors. CEOs have advisors. You already have advisors as a CEO. They're called your executive team. They're called your CPA, your attorney. Like, you bring in people that can help you to grow. And so if you have trouble thinking of coaching in that perspective, maybe think of it as an advisor who can really help you elevate your thinking. Maybe that'll get you over the hump. I definitely, there's definitely a lot of woo-woo things out there, and coaching is one of the less woo-woo things. And you can get way out there, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, so think of it as a process inquiry to elevate your thinking. So
I love that. And I think you're right. And it just takes a bit of just reframing something as the concept or the idea so that you're okay with it. Like, whatever works for you, right? In that moment or that situation.
Yeah.
What is the thing that right now you're most fascinated with about, I guess, the coaching endeavor, perhaps? What is the thing that you're trying to improve in your own process of coaching? Like, tell me a bit about that discovery of like how to make your own business better, and what is the thing that you're connecting with the most right now that keeps you excited?
Wow, man, there's so many things. I get fired up when I see growth, and when when my clients get fired up with what we're working on. What I'll say is, for me, like, I'm actually just finished up a certification course with the International Coaching Federation, and have learned so much in the process about even like really sharpening my skills as a coach, learning to ask even more powerful questions that are going to bring better insights. And I'll say, like, when I think about what's making an impact, I was just going through this yesterday with a client, and I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about before. Like, we've got to begin with the end in mind. Okay. So you think that you want to retire in 10 years. Great. You think that you want your business to be $10 million. Awesome. Let's look at what's behind that. What do you want your income to be after you're done? So what does your personal wealth target look like? And what's your net worth now? Okay. So we have a gap to close of X dollars from your business. And then we get into, okay, so what does business valuation look like now? What would our percent growth need to be over how many years in order to achieve that? Map it all out, and then, like, the clarity that comes from that, just that little process that I take clients through it can be mind blowing. It's like, went through this process yesterday. It was like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't realize how achievable my dream is. I'm like, yeah, like 15% growth. Easy. You can do that. You've done way more than that the last 3 years in a row. And so just like seeing that and being like, okay, I can do this. Or the client being like, yeah, I can do this. And then taking that down into, okay, this is what it means for your planning, your strategy, your execution, how we go about doing all of those things. That gets me fired up when people get fired up about things like that. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Man, well, I know that you offer, because right on your website, you offer everybody that first free call, of course. And you got to understand, sometimes you're not the right person for them. They're not the right client for you. There's a bit of this, discovery period that needs to happen. What would you say to somebody, perhaps be like, you know what, I need to make some changes. I'm not sure about this coaching thing. What would be the thing that you would say to that person to get them over the line of, like, consider this, as X, Y, or Z. Maybe there's a different mentality that you can approach to be okay with it.
Yeah. I just say, like, pretend that you are Tiger Woods. Pretend that you're right. Pretend that you're Bill Gates or whatever. All these guys that you're like, these are some of the most successful people. They have a coach, and so, like, every professional golfer, every professional tennis player, obviously, there's a coach of every team. They've all got a coach, and it's not something to be like scared of or embarrassed about or anything like that. It's just a tool. It's a tool for your growth. And so, how do you use your PSA or your RMM or your documentation? Like it's all a tool to get to an end, right? So think about coaching in that perspective. Then hey, it's just another tool that I have in my toolbox to help me grow, to help my company grow, and to help me grow personally. And maybe that'll get you over the hump. But again, like you said, it's really a process of evaluating the individual, the strength, like how could this relationship even work out? Because that's that's the whole thing, is just like, could there be a fit? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, I start out every conversation with that idea. It's like, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I can tell you what I do. I can see if you might be a good candidate for it, and then you can decide if you might like to do it. But I'm not going to try and sell you anything. Like
how low pressure of you, Brian.
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
and then I'll try actually to unsell you before, if you do say yes. Like that's the next step in the process.
Convince you don't need me. I'll tell you who doesn't have a coach right now: the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Oh yes, all right. I see. We're going there.
Only because my CEO Dan Wensley is such a big fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day on another forum. But Brian, this has been so great, man. I encourage anybody who's been curious about the idea of coaching, just get on a call with Brian. You can find him at brianhoppe.com. Yeah. And I think even that one step could change your life in the most positive of ways. Brian, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. We did have a problem with the LinkedIn stream, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and push out the recording of this briefly on LinkedIn separately, just so that it stays in the history of things. So you're going to see yourself live again in a minute, but it'll be from the recording. Brian, you're great. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you at one of the MSP events perhaps in the next few months. And in the meantime, thanks so much for coming to hang out. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Luis. All right. Everybody else, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We're here every Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern for MSP Confidential. You can find all our episodes on the SkillPad YouTube channel, or just visit mspconfidential.com. That'll take you straight there. We'll see you next week. Ciao.